1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Good morning, everybody. We could be a little responsive here. I know it's not a Baptist church, but good morning, everybody. All right, it is wonderful to see you. If it is a spring day in Seattle, over 40 degrees and not pouring rain, it is a good sign, a siman tov, as we say in Judaism. It is wonderful to have all of you here for our annual Clergy Institute. I should have looked this, I think it's the 43rd annual. Thank you, Rabbi Spicer. It is the 43rd annual Clergy Institute, and it really is such an honor and a pleasure to share this with you. How many of you, for whom is this the first time you've come to this event? Okay, wonderful, welcome. Who has been here before? Beautiful. I'm not going to say 5 years, 10 years. I'm not going to go down that road with you. It's just wonderful to have you here again. There are some very significant thank yous I'd like to extend before we begin our wonderful program today. First of all, to Rabbi Kate Spicer, our rabbi focused on many things, not least of which is adult engagement, and Reverend Dr. Kara Markel for both of their, from the Seattle University side and the Temple to Hirsch Sinai side, their curation, organization, follow-up, overseeing, all of those things. Just so deeply grateful. Thank you very much. And to my thought partner, colleague, and friend, Reverend Dr. Michael Trice. Where is he? He's back here filming. Okay. Reverend Dr. Michael Trice, thank you so much for your continued partnership and for your embrace of this ongoing relationship between Temple and Seattle University, but in particular for this event, which really began literally, believe it or not, what would you believe? I can't believe I've been here for 23 years, and literally my first year here with one of Michael's predecessors, we received a wonderful grant from the Alfred and Tillie Shemanski Trust. And in addition to the separate grants that Seattle University and Temple get, we got a very special, back then when the stock market was a little more stable on the upswing, there was a little bit of a windfall and we had extra money to begin to do some programming together. It resulted in a center in the School of Theology and Ministry, and the descendant of that is the Center for Ecumenical and Interfaith Engagement that Dr. Trice, for which Dr. Trice is the director. We are also very grateful to the family of Henry and Mila Eisenhardt in my literally, I think within weeks of coming to this congregation, got a chance to visit Henry at Klein Gallen in his incredibly erudite lair of books and chess sets and everything. And he was such a staunch proponent of youth education, of interfaith engagement. And Ted and Kellen and Joan have continued this incredible generosity and support of this program, which is, again, in so many ways, a reflection of, at least in my conversation with him, Henry's vision. And yes, please, that's worthy of. And as I mentioned earlier, we are grateful to the Alfred and Tillie Shemanski Trust for their ongoing support of this program, and particularly the support that they give for the efforts that Seattle University and Temple to Hirsch Sinai forged together in meeting the needs of this moment. When I work with folks or on my own to decide what speakers might be good, sometimes a year out, oftentimes I've been luckier than I've been smart, in the sense that it just so happens that I perhaps had no idea what was going to occur. And it always seems that within a week or two of a program for which the speaker has some unique insight to share, some event happens that bears out the prescient prophetic view that I have here, but it really is rolling the dice. It's not completely rolling the dice, because a year ago, Rabbi Spicer and Dr. Trice and I sat down and said, where are we going to be in April 2024? And we imagined not a great scenario leading up to the election, and the reality has surpassed our most infamous imagination as to what could happen. And so I think today's experience is going to be even more timely and more important and insightful than we could have imagined at that time. In a moment, I'm going to welcome Dr. Elcott to share with us. And just to give you a little bit of the structure of the day, Dr. Elcott will share some thoughts. Then he and I will be in dialogue. We'll open up and provide an opportunity for some questions and answers initially. Then, of course, we'll have to eat again because, don't want your blood sugar to wane. And over those, one of the most important elements is, certainly we hope it is a wonderful repast, I'm sure it will be, but one of the elements that we hope to encourage is the opportunity to share impressions of this part of the program with one another, and then perhaps garner some reflections and some other questions to wrap up our morning. Professor David Elcott was, I just realized, was the Henry and Marilyn Taub Professor of Practice and Public Service and Leadership and the Director of the Advocacy and Political Action Specialization at New York University's Wagner School of Public Service. Now he is, what's your formal title with the SUNY?
Professor at SUNY, the State University of New York, which has an auxiliary program, program that they provide college degrees for men who are incarcerated, in my case, in a maximum security prison. So I teach social psychology to men who've been convicted of such serious crimes. And as I mentioned to the rabbi, they're among the best students I've ever had in 40 years of teaching. Really remarkable thing, and should change all of our understandings of the carceral system in the United States and what it does and doesn't do.
So perhaps education is wasted on the young and the free and is less taken for granted. But I would regard Dr. Elcott as a Renaissance mensch, in the sense that he, if you look up his CV, he's been involved in so many different things as a Renaissance man, but as a Renaissance mensch, as a person of passionate devotion to social justice, social service. He's been involved in so many different areas. His work, of course, is focused on civic obligation, community building, interfaith, and ethnic activism. And he is the author of Faith, Nationalism, and the Future of Liberal Democracy. And he wrote it in 2021. Talk about a prophetic vision for things. And we're going to be discussing that. But before I welcome Dr. Elcott for his initial remarks, I just want to set the stage with a little bit of a presentation here. For those of you who are online, it's going to be muted for copyright reasons, so you're not having a lapse in hearing. We're just going to mute this part for those who are watching online. It is a very Jewish thing to offer a little bit of gallows humor and to mix the humorous with the serious and the issues of great and deep concern, and really to help us understand not only the challenges we face, but perhaps some of the remedies and ways we can consider our efforts to confront this challenge and transcend it. It is an honor and a pleasure to share with you Professor David Elcott. Thank you.
Well, I've never quite started this way. And in a sense, my interest in being here is twofold. I should say, but it's wonderful being in your synagogue. It's really fabulous being here and actually meeting friends from camp, Ramah, that only 60 years ago, and Rachel. It's wonderful seeing you. I was in her home when she was 15, speaking in Charleston, South Carolina. So it's great being here and wonderful being back in Seattle. I was in Seattle and at a major event after the Passion of the Christ. The movie came out, speaking here about its meaning and the implications of that. So that's a number of years ago, and here we are still trying to work out in the United States, is much true around the world, exactly what the future is going to look like in the relationship between religion, between faith, and politics and policies. My interest is to kind of give us a grounding understanding of what's happening that may take us a little bit away from the partisanship with which we are looking at the political scene. On the whole, in a setting like this, an interfaith setting, the assumption is people here are very concerned about an America that would be polarized, an America where religion would be used to assault and to damage others, and I understand that well. But that said, it's critical for us to step back and ask the question, why is this happening? And for those who don't agree with the way that we're seeing the world, why is that? What is it that they're seeing? And I'd like to explore that with you because chances are good that's not the news that you're watching, it's not the articles that you're reading, and it's probably not the appeals that you're getting to participate in American political life. So that's really my goal. I am an academic, and I wrote the book that it would be readable beyond the university. I hope that is the case, that Notre Dame Press pushed this as a popular book, not just an academic book, and I was pleased with that. But it is helping us to ground us, to better understand, in some cases to better understand others, in some cases for you to better understand an enemy. But what I am convinced of is that there is a battle, in a sense. We are in a liminal moment for the future of what America and other liberal democracies are whether or not they're going to be able to succeed. And there's a significant portion of every country that is a democracy that is saying it's not working for us. And so I would really like to explore that part with you. If it makes you uncomfortable, you're welcome to voice that before the day is out. So I've got 4 quick themes that I would like to develop, and then the Rabbi and I are going to be able to engage in conversation, and you as well. The first is the very nature of democracy itself. We use the word democracy, and we're often challenged by hearing others use the word democracy, and they seem to be saying something completely different from what we understand. Right? So when we say democracy, what's like the fundamental principle of democracy? Somebody, what is a democracy? How do you know it's democracy? What do people do in a democracy? They vote, right? And when they vote, what happens? They elect them. Meaning, how do they elect? You have votes, and then who wins? The majority. That is a notion of democracy, majoritarian democracy, which is you got a kindergarten class, and you say to the kids, who wants to play inside, who wants to play outside? And they know already by kindergarten that if 7 kids say we're going to play inside and 22 kids say we're going to play outside, what are you going to do? You're going to play outside. And that notion of majority says, we are the people, we are the majority. We represent what this country is. We have a right for the country, for the policies, for the culture. we have a right for it to reflect our majority view. But that doesn't quite describe American democracy. Because American democracy has another piece to it, which is what? Representation. Well, yes, representation, yes, electoral college, which in some ways flies against popular vote alone, but we have something else fundamental to this country that is the reason that we have a constitution, because when the Constitution was written, it was approved only on the promise that there would be 10 amendments to that Constitution, the Bill of Rights. And what did the Bill of Rights essentially say? That although you have a majority rule, you have minority rights. Yes, the majority has a right to state what policy should be, but it can't trample the rights of religious groups, of ethnic groups. Eventually, it's going to be race as well, right? That within a country, the majority has limitations. Now, most of us, our view of America and of liberal democracy is that the word liberal democracy means that we protect minority rights. Places like Hungary, where the prime minister talks about illiberal democracy, he's still using the word democracy, but he focuses on majoritarian democracy, the right of the majority to determine what the country will be. That is a significant portion of America as well, because there's a third understanding of democracy, which says what makes a nation a nation? What makes a society a society? Well, yes, it's geography, although not always geography. It's not always language, because there are countries that have multiple languages, and there's the same language spoken in a number of different countries, right? What makes our country a country is that we share an understanding of the past. We share a present culture in which we feel at home. We imagine our future together. And for some, they say, wait a moment, the culture of America from its founding is Christian. That doesn't mean that others can't live here. But what brings us together is everybody knows what Easter is. Not quite the Easter that we saw here, but everybody knows what Easter is. Everybody knows Christmas. That it's all right that things may be closed on Sundays, because that represents the history of our country. Or as some legal scholars, conservative legal scholars are saying, there are traditions out there. And it's not necessarily that you have to be a church-going Christian to believe them. It's just kind of the ethos of the country, right? And that America was founded by Christians. It's an overwhelming Christian majority. That while it is perfectly legitimate to have others within our country, we need to respect the fact of a shared culture. And that shared culture, we see it here. By the way, it's not just here. There are other countries that have that as well. Israel has a shared culture. It's made a point of passing its laws that it is a Jewish country in which minorities can live, but the Jewishness of the country is very clear. Modi in India is saying it is a Hindu country. Period. That's what it is. And then, of course, Europe, you know it even just by looking at the flags. What is the flag of Switzerland? What's the flag of Sweden? The flag of Denmark, of Finland? It's their crosses. It doesn't mean that everyone is a deep believing Christian. In fact, church attendance in Europe is pretty minimal. But it does mean that to be a real Swede, to be really Swedish, you got to either be Christian or accept that is the value of the country. So it's a third understanding of democracy. It's not about voting, it's not about minority rights, but it is about an ethos, something that the people share. So that's the first point I want to make, that when you hear somebody say, America needs to be a democracy, and we're saying, yeah, we understand what that is, but they're understanding it differently. And if you're going to engage in conversation, you've got to understand that piece of who they are and why they're explaining it that way. Which brings me to a second point about this, which is the story of most of us, certainly Jews, but Irish coming to this country, Italians coming to this country, is we're a country of immigrants. That America was founded as an immigrant country, people fleeing here to be free. And the story of America is the expansion of human and civil rights. And we see it, of course, in the contemporary period with LGBTQ rights, of same-sex marriage, the rights of trans, the rights of people who were once enslaved, who now, we believe that's what America is. It is a country that can take in immigrants and expand their rights. But let me give you a different story of America. America was founded by Christians who came here to what for them was a promised land. It was the new Israel. Think of the names of cities, and you've got all these cities that are biblical names. And in fact, the states, when they were their colonies, when they were first founded, were colonies based on religion. Massachusetts Bay Colony was Puritan, and you had Quakers in Pennsylvania, you had Baptists, you had right. The colonies actually had these beliefs, these Christian beliefs, because what was fundamental was we were building something new, something authentically biblical, the new Israel. But it was covenantal in its understanding. What's covenantal? Well, God will defend, protect America. We all know that. A wonderful song written by a Jewish composer. God bless America. Soldiers went out to fight for the Union, singing, "My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. As he died to make us holy, let us die to make men free, as God goes marching on." So from the inception of this country, before the inception of this country, there was this sense we're on a covenantal mission. Now, covenant is then complicated. God is to protect us. God protects America. But what's our obligation? Our obligation is to adhere to the laws, not technical laws, but rather to be God's agents in the world of goodness. And therefore, our citizenship is not simply a civil behavior. Our citizenship is actually a religious act. We are fulfilling our covenantal obligation, and that poses a problem. When two guys or two women having sex in the privacy of their bedroom, okay, don't like it, but that can happen. But for the state to sanction, to actually make sacred the relationship of two men or two women, that is an abomination. And as a citizen, I now become culpable in that. If we take the life of a fetus, a human being, even an embryo, as a human being, that is an abomination. And I'm now a citizen of this country, even though I may not have supported that, I am now liable for that. And if I don't fight for that which is God's truth, the covenant will be broken and America will be destroyed. Now, my guess is there are a few here that would say, oh yeah, that's what I believe. But there is a significant portion of this country that deeply loves the country, that believes very strongly about what behaviors should be acceptable, who believe that God's love of America is in jeopardy unless we act to protect it. Now, when you say to yourself, geez, that's pretty extreme, just know that's exactly what you're hearing in Israel by the present government of the state of Israel. That's what you're hearing in India. That's what you're hearing in many places in the parties in Europe. Some of them have already gained power. Some of them are part of the government. So it's not craziness, this belief that faith, that religious belief, particularly that of the majority, and civil society, the civil nature of society, are merged. It's very complicated for those of us who are not part of that Christian majority. It's saying, well, wait a moment. And it's not saying that those who don't believe this don't belong. It's only saying it's not their right. It's not their right to make the decisions that we, the majority, believe. And I have to say that although not all those who believe in this covenantal understanding of America, that they're not all right-wing Trump supporters, there are also those who are very liberal. Martin Luther King would not have disagreed with what I'm saying. As a deeply faithful Christian, he believed that his mission was to make America abide by God's law, and to be able to experience God's goodness. That's the language in which he spoke. So it's a piece for particularly those of us who try to separate our faith, our religious identity with our civic responsibility, to understand that when one goes into a voting booth, you can't be asked to excise your religious self. You bring that into the voting booth. So we can't be surprised that believing Christians are going to be doing that as well. As I think we know very well, AIPAC tells us how Jews should vote when you walk into the voting booth. Muslims have expressed themselves very clearly recently in Michigan and Wisconsin in the ways that they chose not to vote for Biden on the issues of being Muslim. So that's my second point, or kind of a continuation of that point about democracy, to make it more complicated for us. It isn't like our civics class, First Amendment separates church and state. No, there's never really been a separation of church and state in this country. The understanding was only you can't establish a church. You can't establish a single religion, not that you can't have religion. So that's one piece I want to give. A second thing a second way of understanding what's happening actually comes from game theory. And that says, in games, when we play a game, anybody here play like Gin or Rummy Cute or Mahjong? Any Mahjong? My wife just began playing Mahjong. She retired 37 years as a rabbi, and she's playing Mahjong, right? It's like anybody here play Mahjong? Good. When you play Mahjong, what's the goal? Is that the only goal, to win? So then you win the game and then it's all over and you never get together again. You play, say it nice and loud. You play again. Why? Because what do you want? What is it in the experience of Mahjong? Well, it's a social issue. Yeah. Right, you're together, you play, you win one time. My wife struck it great last week. We're on our way to Paris. She won 35 cents, right? And the next week she didn't. She said, we're not going to Paris, right? The goal is to play because the game, the ongoingness of the game is so important. And there are rules. Some of the rules are formal. This is how you play it. Some of them are informal, but you don't exactly look at the other person's tiles, right? It's not that it's written in the rules you can't look at their tiles, you just know it. That's called an infinite game. The goal is for the game to continue. Imagine democracy, liberal democracy. It's an ongoing game. That's the goal. You win an election, you lose an election, but the goal of democracy is for that to continue. Illiberal democracy has a very different view of the game. What's the view? Absolute victory. A victory in which the game ends. The goal is not the continuation of the game. The goal is to end the game. And because you don't want to be a loser, you will do whatever it takes to win that game, even if it means breaking the informal rules and perhaps even the formal rules as well. So I would argue attempts to disenfranchise elements of the population is one of the ways. It's informal, not formal, because the laws can allow you to do that. right? They can allow you to say, well, no, you can't vote in this circumstance, you can't vote in that way, right? The goal, though, of an illiberal democracy is to end the game. So it's another way of thinking about this as well. I think it's very important for us to conceptualize this in a way that we can talk to others and say, because in my work and in my research, I work with people whose political views are radically different than mine. In the book, I cite some of my colleagues. They would vote item for item different than I would vote, but not on the issue of democracy. And that's a very important thing that I think we're facing here in this country. Israel is facing it on the issue of its parliamentary democracy and whether or not they should have another election. You're seeing that throughout the world, that there are those who want to end the game, need to be challenged, so that all those people are saying, well, I'm not sure where to go, understand the danger to democracy itself as we understand it, which is the game's got to continue. And if you undermine the institutions, if you undermine the processes of democracy, some of them formal, some informal, you will ultimately destroy the game, at which point you are destroying the system. And we have no idea, well, we do have ideas where that goes because we've seen autocratic governments and what happens. So that's the next point that I want to make. I have one more piece that I want to mention, and then we can sit and talk together. And this one is very hard for us. The word deplorable, how was it used? Anybody remember? Hillary Clinton used that word to describe kind of those people in the middle of the country. And it's pretty much people who have high school education or less, white, Christian, although that's expanded, we're seeing somewhat as well, that these are people who, they're not like us. How many of you have a passport? Right? Do you know that half the country does not have a passport? They have never left this country. For them, maybe the experience of going to Egypt is they go to Las Vegas and there's the pyramid and they'll have a shirt, I've been to, right? I know we laugh, but for these people, America is a place. Their town is a place. They're grounded there. The language that we use in sociology is they are somewhere. People like us, we're everywhere. One of my goals as a parent, I have four kids, I have 10 grandkids, right? My goal is that we could drop them anywhere in the world and they could make their way, right? That they've got a capacity to engage in the world. So for us, globalization is an incredible benefit. And we love that type of life. We eat sushi one night, we eat Thai the next night, we'll have Mexican the third night. That makes a lot of sense to us. But for a significant portion of this country, that is not what they want. They want to be somewhere. And somewhere isn't only a physical place, it's a spiritual place, it's a cultural place. I know what to expect when I meet my neighbor. I know what it should be, that should happen in my school. I know what's going to happen in my church. I know what's happening in my community, because we share a set of values that are clear to us, that are meaningful to us. And even though many of us don't follow all of them, because we do know that the areas of adultery, of incest, of premarital sex, Bible Belt is extreme in that. So not everybody is following it, but it doesn't mean because you don't follow it that you don't believe it, right? And our response, for many of us, I'm going to read you a line written in 2016 that I have in my book. It says the following: morally, these Trump supporters, morally are indefensible. The white American underclass is in a thrall to a vicious, selfish culture whose main products are misery and used heroin needles. Donald Trump's speeches make them feel good, so does OxyContin. For the first time in America's history, other than in the case of pandemic, like we had recently, like the flu epidemic at 1918, for the first time, a category of Americans, white, high school or less educated, rural or semi-rural in the middle of the country, have a higher morbidity rate, a higher death rate than they did 15 years ago. Right? It's the first time this has happened. It's now extended, it was middle age, now it's extended to younger, and now to women as well. Right? Something terrible is happening there, and a wonderful, wonderful researcher, Arlie Hochschild, writes, she says, this group of Americans feel that they are trash. There's another book that literally says that, you know, white trash, meaning as an analysis. The book is trying to explain. And their view is, this group, we've been standing patiently in line for our piece of the American dream. And Jews get in front of the line. And blacks get in front of the line. And queers get in front of the line. Now even people who are illegally crossing into this country, they're in front of the line. What about us? Who's caring about us? And we're a big segment of this population. Who is going to make us feel good about who we are, about what we stand for, about what we believe? And so she writes that at a Trump rally, what you're seeing here, but I want you to see this other side of it, I can feel good about myself. I have others around me who share in the culture they want, in the America they want, and I feel good here, as opposed to the way I feel when people on the West Coast or in the East Coast talk about me and call me deplorable. So that's the third point I want to make is people don't do well when they're hurt and when they're hurting. And it is, I spend a lot of time going into these communities. I told the story, and poor Michael has to hear it for the third time. I was in Vidalia, Georgia. What's Vidalia known for? I went there with my suitcase. I threw all my clothes into a bag that I carried on the plane and filled my suitcase with 30 pounds of Vidalia onions. What you did not say about me is my wife does not cook. I do all the cooking, so I've got Pesach coming. You know, as a matter of fact, you originally wanted this to be 2 weeks from now, and I go, are you kidding? I've got my house filled. I don't just have the Seders. Everybody comes and lives with us. So we got 21 living at the house for Pesach. Right. So we've got to recognize that. I go to Vidalia, Georgia. I go into the church, and I'm doing surveys. I'm doing a focus group. I'm meeting with the ministers. I've now got the focus group together. I've seen the surveys. The surveys on every social issue, you know exactly what their views are. They're exactly the antithesis of mine, right? Okay, so we're talking. It starts, I say, well, how do you make decisions, political decisions? What role does your faith have? How do you decide? So the woman pipes up right away. She goes, oh, I just do whatever my husband tells me. She's playing me because she knows that's exactly what I'm expecting to hear. Everybody in the room starts laughing because they know the last thing this woman does is listen to her husband about anything, right? So we talk, and it's very interesting how they process. And they say, who are you? When we're done, who are you? I say, well, I'm a professor at New York. I'm Jewish, and I read the Bible in the original. Well, that's all they needed to hear. They said, I got to preach. Right? In the original. And they said, well, can you preach? I'm prepared to preach. So I say, yes, let's take a section of the book of Kings. The story where Elijah, the prophet, Eliyahu Navi, the prophet, is in a cave. He's been run out of town. The king is after him. He is vulnerable, frightened, and he has a soliloquy in which he basically says, it's all over, everybody hates me, there's no chance, I am abandoned, I'm the last one. And God speaks to him. He says, go out and stand at the mouth of the cave. Who knows the story? What happens? What happens? Come on, somebody. Come on, I've got clergy here at least. What happens? He goes out and what happens? There's an earthquake. Right, what else? Storm, right? It's wild, right? And then a still small voice, and God says, hey, it's cool. Don't worry, Elijah, I'm with you. It's all right. Now, that's where most people end the story, but it's not where it ends. He goes back in the cave, and he speaks again, and what does he say? The exact same thing. I'm alone. I'm the only one. Nobody else cares. I tell that, and then a woman says, maybe what that's teaching us, it's hubris to believe we're the only people of faith. Maybe we have to accept and look at and listen to others and recognize they're faithful as well. And then another person, and this is in her congregation with her minister there. And this is the covenant of God, right wing, speaking in tongues congregation. And then a second person says, a woman says, 2 generations ago in this church, we taught that God wants segregation. God believes black people are inferior, and we know that was wrong. Perhaps our children will say about same-sex marriage what we say about our grandparents on the issues of segregation. Now, I don't think that they all suddenly voted for same-sex marriage. Rather, we were able to have a conversation. We were able to have a conversation. And that's the last point I want to make. The reason that I wrote the book is, in spite of the fact that the largest growth, religious growth in America is the nuns, not N-U-N-S, but N-O-N-E-S, the fact that church attendance is down in this country, as it is in much of the Western world, faith leaders matter because it's one of the few places where adults will get together and have a meaningful conversation, just like here. It doesn't happen at a football game. It doesn't happen at a baseball game. There aren't other places we can be together, and therefore faith leaders have a significant voice. People of faith have a significant voice, and my concern is that people of faith who want to defend liberal democracy, who want to protect the game with all of the messiness of it, but want to have an opportunity to work on that messiness, that we're not speaking clearly enough, that people of faith need to support democracy, not for the pragmatic reason it's better for Jews, to be in a democracy than a non-democracy. It's better for Muslims, right? But actually a theology of democracy, that Judaism, Christianity, Islam, right, particularly these Western religions, we have learned something very fundamental, which is the greatest idolatry is to believe that you alone know what God wants and God's will. And that true faith has to accept that there is a chasm separating me from God, and therefore I have to accept, not that I don't believe what I believe, and not that I don't have the faith that I have, and not the religion that I believe in, but I have to accept I can learn from others and the way they are in the world. And that theology matches very much what democracy has to be. So that's the reason that I'm speaking is for that fourth point. Yes, I would like to create, better understanding of the issues that are out there, for sure, but the real purpose is to motivate all of us to engage not simply in the pragmatic and not simply laughing at the stupidity or the infantile nature of somebody else's beliefs, whether it's religious or political, but actually to find ways to engage in interfaith settings. And guess what? That's exactly what this is. So thank you, because it's really great.
Thank you so much. Really an incredible sharing of initial thoughts. I really resonated very much with what you were saying. I think Bill Maher, amongst many people, has said, you can think what you want to think about Trump, but you can't hate his followers. I mean, certainly some of them have extreme views that are contemptible, but we can't hate half the country. And to understand the basis of humiliation from which they are expressing their needs and convening is really something we have to recognize. So in the book, you cite threats to liberal democracy emerging from, as you say, seething anger and populist revolt rooted in two trends. One is a nativist uprising against perceived globalism, and religion as a national identity marker that serves that view. In light of the history of the 20th century's two greatest assaults on liberal democracy, Nazism and Stalinism, which were avowedly irreligious or even outright hostile to faith, why do the markers of faith resonate more in this moment than previously?
One of my teachers, I worked 9 years with Rabbi Harold Schulweis, a really brilliant rabbi and theologian. He said, this conversation about believe in God or not, he said, all of us believe in gods, or in the language that I use as a social scientist, we all have ways that we see the world that are fundamental for us. So in that sense, for me, communism, Nazism were no less dogmatically religious of that type of than people who had other faiths. So for me, it's easy to say, well, in the 20th century, the greatest destruction came not from religion, but from political views. But for me, I don't really, Nazi believers had all the what would
trappings.
you say, trappings of religion. And we know for communists, we know that very much for Jewish communists. It was like, it was their religion, as opposed to, you go to shul, I'm going to go to a Marxist meeting. I do think there's something else happened. The Enlightenment gave us a movement against religion for the very reason that you had all these religious wars in the 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th centuries. So the Enlightenment said, no, we got to get rid of that. And the push was to get religion out of the civil sphere. And that reached its heyday post-World War II, because after the massive destruction, people said, look, we got to find another way to live. We have the Declaration of Human Rights. We have the founding of the United Nations. America began passing civil rights, human rights laws, and that lasted for about 50 years. But Pope John Paul was right when the response to Stalin's line, how many troops do you have? Don't need troops. That the suppression of faith, which was overt in places like the Soviet Union, in the United States, when the first set of Supreme Court rulings to limit religion in America, no schools, no civil setting, Potter Stewart, who was a dissenting judge, he said, it's not going to work. Essentially, he said, it won't work. You can't take religion out and have you can teach communism in school, but you can't teach religion in school. He said it's not going to work. And we've seen that's exactly what's happened, which is the view was religion can't be in a sub level for other types of ways people engage the world.
And when Potter Stewart said that, wasn't that the same era that produced the insertion of under God of the blessed religions?
No, he came a little after, but it's true. That was under Eisenhower. We didn't say under God. That is also a story of being anti-communist. The point I'm making, though, is we misread this, that people were feeling robbed as opposed to opened. And yes, and if you can buy what I said, which is societies need to feel they share something. Look, most countries still end up being divided by religion. Even America, an immigrant country, the overwhelming religion is Christianity. The overwhelming religion in Israel is Jewish. In India is Hindu. In Burma, in Myanmar is Buddhist. It's good. Buddhist, I thank God for Myanmar because Buddhists are killing people. I wouldn't like Buddhism to get away. Only Hinduism, Judaism, and Islam kill people. Buddhism kills people as well. So it turns out that in spite of the fact that we have nationhood, most of the nations actually also have religious majorities. And those religious majorities across the world are saying, not fair, we have a right to assert ourselves. So it's a great way for populists, nationalists like Trump. Nobody's going to argue that Trump is a religious man, including the religious leaders who support him. They're not going to say, oh, this is a deeply believing Christian man. They don't say that. But what they do believe is that he knows how to tap into that sense of loss of anomie, which this group of Christians experience.
But theologically, what they say is he's Cyrus. God is using him as a tool, an unintended outlier of a tool to achieve what God wants to achieve.
Those are the apologists. The others say that he's more like David, because he's an adulterer, murderer, all of those features.
And the progenitor of Mashiach.
Exactly, but the Messiah descends from David. Right? So we have it in our own tradition, right? That it's not purity, it's not about purity that determines who our leaders are. So,
one of the things that was most striking from your work here is the sense that the power of religion as a tribal marker versus a theology that people are believing in, that they'd rather belong than believe. How did those who exploit faith to manage to denude it of theology and belief, reducing it merely to a tribal marker of loyalty? Or was this something that arose organically that savvy and manipulative leaders merely leveraged? Or is there something inherent in human nature that favors belonging over believing?
So I think one of the things that we've determined, social science has determined, is that in spite Michael, are you back? Is Mike? Yeah. So Michael asked me a similar question. This podcast that he's done, which thank you, it's wonderful. We're meaning making. The economists were wrong. Economists said we will vote, we will support our economic interests. No, what we're seeing now is it's not true. Daniel Kahneman, who just died recently, Nobel laureate. He won the economics prize in psychology because he said, economists don't get it. People are meaning making, and therefore their interests, their votes will be about meaning. So in the same way, as you know as a rabbi, often you'll have congregants who expect you to behave in a certain way as a religious leader, even though they won't do that, right? But you will do that because that's important. So it is here. Religion, these beliefs, I don't necessarily believe them, but they can ground me anyway. That's the truth, even if I don't do it, right? And it provides meaning for me. Even though I don't really believe it, it provides meaning. Look, I think Jews are the best example of that. Right, my son, one of my kids, when his wife, who was brought up Orthodox, was reading to my grandson Kruv and was reading a book and says, "God," my son would yell across the room, "Don't you believe that?" Meanwhile, he davens at services, he reads Torah, reads Megillah, right? Because we understand that it provides something for us. It provides a sense of grounding and meaning. Tragically, what we're seeing is populist, nationalist leaders are using that as a tool to mobilize, knowing that because it's meaning-making, we can grab people. My colleague Tobias Krimmer, a wonderful young German academic, tells the story of an anti-immigrant rally in Cologne in which they're bearing crosses, right? And he said the ironic thing is that the group that was there, none of them are religious. But for them, the cross symbolizes that identity and meaning of which they don't believe. So I think, bottom line, religion can be a vehicle, obviously for great good, but it can also be a vehicle of polarization that has nothing to do with belief, but does have to do with identity, with ethnicity, and fundamentally with tribalism. And by the way, Jews, look, I'm going to be smack on, when we are told as Jews that we should vote for over 100 members of Congress who voted to not accept Biden as president. And we're told they should be supported even though they're out to destroy the game. That's an example of tribalism as well.
Now, listen, I could not agree with you more. And just for the record, I think AIPAC's influence amongst American Jews is waning because of that. Exactly. So why do you think the masses of the disenfranchised feel that liberal democracy has betrayed them and robbed them of their dignity, when the tenets of liberal democracy, respect for the individual, the sanctity of rights, openness to ideas, and regard for the vulnerable, appear to be a far better response than autocracy? And would you see this as similar to the rejection on the left of neoliberalism, and thus liberal democracy by extension, despite its better reflection of their values?
You got that question? That was... I'm gonna translate it into one line. No, because it's a fundamental question. Why would people vote or act against their own interests? Why would people do that? So in the
Thomas Frank, what's the matter with Kansas?
So in 1950s, it was accepted that the difference between the lowest paid full-time employee of a company and the CEO was about 10 times. So if this one was earning $10,000 a year, the CEO was earning $100,000 a year. I think you all know that that is blown completely away. 5%, I think if I'm getting this, remember this right, 5% of Americans own 85% of America's wealth. So if we simply start there, talk about being left behind, talk about feeling abandoned, and of course, who is that hit most? People who have only a high school or less education. So partially you've got it there. Now, why would you vote for a corrupt oligarch, right, who represents everything, doesn't allow unions, doesn't pay his workers? Why would you vote for him? Well, because what he says. Again, he may be himself as a person a weak model, but what he says, he's speaking for those who are most, you saw it here when he said, I stand between you and that elite that wants to take everything away from you. So I don't think there's any surprises here. Actually, do you mind if I do something, ask something here? What would you say?
Can I translate that for? I don't know.
Do me a favor, turn to the person next to you, or if you're, I was going to say, you say turn to the right, but that won't help to the person, right? Yeah. Turn to a person next to you. What would you say to a person who says, Trump represents me? He's speaking for me. Given all that we've talked about, so you're not going to turn and say, you're an idiot. What would you say to somebody who's saying, I feel abandoned by the liberal democracy that made promises that it can't keep. It can't keep them economically. It can't keep them in terms of meaningfulness in my life. It can't make me feel secure in my culture. What would you say? Is it right?
Please.
I'm going to give you 3 minutes. Turn to somebody. What would you say? No. It was just, you were asking, if we were in academics talking to each other, that was the question you were asking, which was exactly on target. It wasn't, I just, was able to translate.
Sometimes I get it.
It was perfect. It was perfectly phrased. You got exactly the point. So I went to camp.
Your mic might be on. So
the family that supports this, I went to camp with her.
With Kellen?
She went to Camp Ramah with me.
You're surprised how many former camp.
All right, to be continued over lunch. Okay, folks. Well, we'll continue. Don't worry. So I want to continue. I'll try to break this down to be less multi-part questions. You mentioned earlier, and another striking thing in your book is you mentioned counterintuitively how perhaps this nationalist surge that utilizes religion is rooted in an American history that is less successful at dividing church and state than we have kind of always learned over the years. But wouldn't you say that despite that, the bulwarks of liberal democracy, our ideals and our institutions, have served as effective checks on those currents as they did on January 6th and will do so moving forward?
No, you're asking me the question that I don't want to be asked. And it's a question, here I have no expertise over anyone else here. My book was published on January 1st, 2021. Now, it does kind of make a point. We reached a precipice. We didn't fall off. So in a sense, January 6th only added to that sense of precipice. We didn't fall off. Look, my dilemma, my personal dilemma, and in a sense for Jews, it's a collective dilemma. I'm a child of a refugee family. My mom fled Germany in 1939. My grandparents got out of Germany because of my mother, who was 17, and got them out in August of 1939. The rest of the family pretty much was murdered. So with that memory, it's very easy to tap into, we see where this is going. And in a sense, Yesterday I met with some really wonderful, passionate youth ministers, wonderful, deeply committed people of faith, young. And they listened to me speak, and they said, you know, it doesn't really make a difference. Trump, Biden, it doesn't really make a difference. We have to bring down the whole system. So that's that concern on the left. I think for Jews, for many of us who see ourselves as progressive, these last 6 months have been just horrifying. What happened, what Hamas, which is, and I spent much of my 30 years working on Israeli-Palestinian relations. What happened in October to Israelis by a truly evil force of Hamas, a genocidal, publicly genocidal mission, was unbearable. And then what has happened in the 6 months since, both with hostages and with the deaths in Gaza, is unbearable. But we really have to distinguish here. So for me, when I listen to From the River to the Sea, that it's Israel's fault of all this happened, that type of kind of lack of historical gravitas and understanding concerns me, both on the right and the left. We've been there before. We've seen what happens. It's a very important reality that Hitler never won an election. But the Nazi Party and the leftist anti-Weimar Republic parties combined brought down the Weimar Republic. And in that sense, as much as I'm saying, I guess I can also ask the question, not just what would you say to those who support Trump, but what would you say to your kids or grandkids or neighbors, friends who are saying they're all the same, it makes no difference. What would you say to them? So we are in a strange period in which those of us committed to human rights, civil rights, to a liberal democracy of social and economic justice in a world that reflects those views, sometimes we feel like we're alone, right? We're being besieged on this side, we're being besieged on this side, and feeling very vulnerable. And I feel very vulnerable. Yeah, I definitely do. I feel vulnerable for my children and for my grandchildren. My son said to me, he never experienced anti-Semitism. He went to Orthodox day school. We lived in a very Jewish area. He said, my kids are going to school. They're in high school now. They're in San Francisco. He said, they're going to school. They're the only Jews. He said, and they're dealing with anti-Semitism. I don't even know what to say to them. I never experienced that way. But my 16-year-old grandson asked for Hanukkah, he wanted a Magen David that he can wear to school. And I'm thinking to myself, do I want him to wear Magen David to school where he's one of only 2 Jews?
That's one of the things that's most heartbreaking to me in this moment, even prior to October 7th, and that is you and I, you're a little older than I am. We lived in a golden age where, remember Charles Silberman in 1984 said anti-Semitism is over. I mean, he declared that. Little did he know how this would percolate. But what's really most heartbreaking to me is that my children and potential grandchildren are going to experience anti-Semitism not in substance but in scope that is far more similar to what our parents and grandparents experienced than what we experienced. And that goes against our sense that the moral trajectory is always moving upward.
If I have a core critique of Donald Trump, it is that he has released the id of humanity. And it's not just Jews. It's not just the hatred of Jews. It's kind of, so yeah, I think we're in a very, look, honestly, it's Erev Pesach for me. I live in New York. I'm flying, why am I flying here? It's because you all have to take this seriously. And taking it seriously means you have to reach out. And take a stand for humanity. Just as Beethoven did.
The Eroica Symphony would have been a better backdrop for this.
One more quick question. We'll take some initial Q&A, and then we'll move to our opportunity to really interact and to eat. You mentioned how white Christian nationalism particularly embraces the metaphor of the biblical model of ancient Israel, with the promised land, with covenant, blessings and curses based on human behavior. In the same vein, would you say, as a remedy to that the prophetic message that checked those excesses in ancient Israel will provide an effective check now, particularly if they're linked to the tenets of liberal democracy?
And I would start with my own bite, right? I wish we need to be a prophetic voice in Israel for those very same sources that talk about land and blood as being fundamental. We have to be able to do that in our own world as well. Yes, I think, look, my guess is that sitting in this room are the prophets who need to speak out. My caveat is the prophets did not, because they, in the end, when the Bible comes to us, the prophetic voice won. So the prophetic voice had a was able to create the direction of Bible and give it its strongest voice. But the prophets in the Bible on the whole didn't speak nicely. One of the great rabbinic teachings is the story of Ishmael and Hagar, that when Ishmael and Hagar are sent out by Abraham, and he's dying, and she puts him aside, and she cries. And it said that the angel heard Ba'asher Husham. She was crying, but heard Ishmael Ba'asher Husham, where he was located. And the rabbis teach that a great teacher doesn't ask the question, what do I want to say? Ask the question, what will they hear? What will Ishmael, hear? So the prophets did not take that into account. And I think we need to take that into account. When we want to speak to those who disagree with us, when we want to engage those in the democratic process, we have to speak ba'asher husham, where they are situated so that they can hear. I used to say to when I was trying to bring together a consortium of Christians and Jews to support the peace process in Israel and Palestine, I said to the Presbyterians, who were the most radical, I said, you have a choice. You either can be pure and cry as you want, or you can have a place at the table so that you can engage and have impact. And I would say that to all of us here, the goal is to have a seat at the table of American conversation now and find ways to speak and be able to listen so as to bring our brothers and sisters who truly don't want to see democracy destroyed, to bring them into the camp of saying, for this moment in time, the battle isn't, and I don't want to minimize in any way, it's not abortion, the battle isn't what we do in Ukraine, absolutely critical issues for sure, but the battle is to protect democracy itself. And that's where our focus needs to be to get us through these months to ensure that in January of 2025, the institutions and ethos of democracy in America, which will have enormous impact around the entire world, will succeed.
So one more quick question. You mentioned in the Jewish chapter, you have a bunch of wonderful midrashic, rabbinic statements. The one that you kind of left out, which I see as one of the key ways in which Judaism can speak to this moment of threat to liberal democracy, is machloket l'shem shamayim. Mm-hmm. The idea from the rabbis from Pirkei Avot that if we can engage in debate for the sake of heaven, with good intentions, with an acceptance of the good intentions of the other, toward a higher truth, that's really what we need to reclaim in our society for civil democracy to truly succeed.
So we recite Shema, and what's the last word in English of Shema? One. That's Deuteronomy. It's Deuteronomy. It's biblical text. I think that's a misunderstanding. That the letters Aleph, Chet, Daled are also used to talk about Ichud, unity, unification. And there's a wonderful, that I do use, Rav Kook, Rav Abraham Isaac Kook, who was the chief rabbi of Palestine, Payas, the whole thing. He said, the building is made of many parts. And we don't always understand how they come together, almost like a puzzle. But in God's echad, in the oneness of God, contradictions are possible. And which is what you're seeing, that if we can accept the idea, elu ve'elu, these and these, even though to us seem to be in contradiction, are the words of a living God, or the living words of God, right? It's so fundamentally Jewish, and thank you for bringing that up, because it's a reminder.
Occupational hazard.
It's a reminder to us. It's a reminder to us that as Jews, we get that to be absolutist is idolatry. We need to accept elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim. There are multiple ways of being in this world, and we've got to find ways to bridge them and communicate and leave space for each other in that. And that's why I say that is a theology of democracy, right? It existed 2,000 years ago, long before there were democracies in the world. We understood this. So,
wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's do just one or two questions. We'll move to the next, and we'll have questions at the wrap-up at the very end as well. So if we can't hear them, I'll repeat them for everyone. Thank you.
Can you speak for a moment about us not taking civic responsibility in voting?
My guys in prison are not allowed to vote. It's something we don't think much about. Like, wait a moment, why should somebody who happens to be in prison be deprived of the right to vote? Turns out there are so many millions of men and women who are not allowed to vote, even after they're out of prison, even after they've served their full term, that it would shift elections in many states, which is another reminder about that. So I say that because these guys in prison so want to have a voice and so take their civic responsibility seriously. One of the things that I did when my children were growing up, and now my grandchildren are doing the same, they go into the voting booth and say a bracha. They actually say simply, Shechiyanu v'kiyamanu v'yanu l'zman hazeh, that they have the right to be able to vote. We should, in our panoply of mitzvot, we should most definitely have a mitzvah that it is a chiyuv, an absolute obligation to vote. And I say that even knowing some people who will vote differently than I would want them to, but absolutely. And particularly for younger people, I see a lot of my younger students from NYU and others who are saying it's not worth voting, it doesn't make any difference. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I want to tell you, my son-in-law founded, he was the president of a Jewish foundation. He left it and founded a More Perfect Union.
Yes.
You know about it,
yes,
good.
Yes.
In which basically he wants Jewish synagogues and Jewish organizations to join simply to support democracy. He's got Republicans and Democrats simply to support democracy. And I want to tell you something. He's having a hell of a time getting synagogues and Jewish organizations to join. We've got, it would call it count. How can we? He said, no, it's just democracy. All we're talking about is supporting democracy. So you're absolutely right. I hope you're out there advocating that across the board, as we all should.
Absolutely wonderful. Please.
Thank you very much, both of you. You began by talking about how half of the country in the middle, south, locate themselves somewhere. And some of the things that we value, the travel, the diversity, globalization, and so forth. What could those folks be proud of, right? Because the stereotypes are, right, gas-guzzling monster trucks, collection of guns, so forth, right? High-voltage light bulbs.
You're like my OxyContin deplorables. Oh, you know what? Forgive me. First off, I grew up semi-rural California. These are good people. These are good people. They bake brownies for, in all of the churches that I was in, the evangelical churches in the South, they all have prison ministries. They go into prisons, and it's not just preaching. They go into prisons to care. Somebody dies in the community, they're present. What do? We call up Amazon and have them send a gift package to. So no, I'm not sure. And there's a lot of very good, wholesome life in towns across this country. I've done work in 49 states across this country in 5 provinces of Canada. What state did I not go to?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
What's the one state? It's like, when you build a house, you're supposed to leave a little piece unfinished, right? So that's my, what state didn't I go to?
Alaska.
No, I was in Alaska. I was scholar in residence. Huh? No. A lot of Jews in Florida.
He's a Jew. How's he not going to go to Florida?
I have to go to Florida. No, the one state, North Dakota. There really was not enough there for me to be able to go. Otherwise, I've been all across this country.
It's really one state, North Dakota and South Dakota. They just get it right. So.
And there's an enormous amount of goodness there, and I think that's exactly that. These uncultured, uncouth, gas-guzzling people who sit and watch TV all day. That's not true. There's a real sense of community and obligation. They know their neighbors. How many of you know all the neighbors who are around you and know what's happening in their lives? Is that a yes? Yeah. That's good.
That's it. Terry's like superhuman. Terry doesn't get it.
But it's really unusual. So we have something to learn about community and community building and faithfulness in those communities that we have something to learn from. They have a lot to learn from us as well.
The person who really focused on this, and this gets to other elements, and we've had him speak here, is Jonathan Haidt, who talked about the ways in which, emotions are much more determinative than reason and fact. You can tell people, this is liberal democracy, you're voting against your self-interest, but if they feel that way, they're going to go that way. But also that they have a different set of core values. We look at kind of diversity and openness or what have you. They look at tradition and loyalty and they look at authority as a positive. And so it's just a very different set of values that are not necessarily negative or positive. They're just different priorities. Let's do one more or so, and then we'll kind of move on, and we'll have opportunity for questions at the other end of lunch too.
What is your name? Well, I'm not sure. The issue of, the problems of the foundational nature of America. You're no longer allowed to teach critical race theory at universities in a number of states across this country. It's a real, obviously, it's a real issue. Our Constitution frames some people as not fully human. Let me say, though, the Bible does that too, right? The Bible calls on us to expel, if not kill off, whole populations of people who aren't like us. And we have managed, over the course of Jewish history, we've managed, for most of us, to find a different way to read it. Yeah, I think we have a battle still taking place. We have a Supreme Court that is making certain choices that they claim are court of the Constitution. I do teach social psychology. I also teach a course on constitutional crises, and I put together the source book for my students. And the source book I put together last year I can't use this year because the Supreme Court has screwed up a lot of the chapters where I say, and this is where it leads. There's a cost to having a constitution. There's a cost to not having. Israel doesn't have a constitution. There's been a cost to Israel's not having a constitution. That we have not dealt as a nation with our history. Here you are in the West, in Washington, where you know very well. You have, because you have Native American tribes here, and what's happened to them, as well as people enslaved. It's complicated. Again, I would say the use of populist nationalism to demonize segments of a population is very dangerous, and that is everywhere in the world. It's a very dangerous thing. It's important for a nation to be able to establish who is in and who is out. We have debates in the Jewish world. Who is Jewish, who is not Jewish? What do you do with an interfaith family? What do you do? I get that, but there's kind of a conversation about it, hopefully civilized. A nation needs to do that as well. Who belongs, who doesn't belong, and I get it that we're still wrapped in that conversation, and there are people with whom I disagree, but I understand engaged in the conversation. So I don't want to, I don't, for me personally, original sin in its use in Christianity is problematic for me as a Jew, but original sin in America is also problematic. We do have original sin, and I would like to think that we are continuing the process of addressing it and remediating it as well. And that's just, again, it's part of the job of a democracy to do that, to take that seriously. I don't know if that's helpful for you or deflective, but.
All right, please, Rabbi, if you want to give some instructions, or please.